Are you still misting your plant leaves? Or maybe you're watering every Sunday without fail. Or maybe, you might be using ice cubes on your plants. Well, please don't do that. That is some bad advice that you've been given. It's time to leave bad, outdated advice in the past year, in the past. Let's figure out what to do instead and create you that beautiful, lush green jungle you've always dreamed of. So at the time of this recording, it is now just about to hit Christmas and we're going into 2025. And of course, everybody reflects on their life and what we're going to do. And I've been thinking a lot about how I can end the year for you guys. And I want to just perhaps go into 2025 with a fresh outlook, because sometimes your plants are struggling, not because you're not treating them the right way, it's because you've been given some bad advice. So let's change that. I'm going to go through some myths that we need to debunk, we need to get rid of, we need to leave in 2024 in the plant world. And I'm going to share with you what to do and how to fix it. So let's get into it. And the first one I really want to get into is misting your leaves. This is probably the most controversial out of all of them. Well, people think it's for humidity levels, but I want you to consider the analogy of humidity with humans, right? So when you're misting your plant leaves, you mist them with a mister, and the misters are beautiful, right? You can get these beautiful aesthetic gold, lovely little sprayers, but you spray the mist onto the leaves and it only stays there for a very, very short while. So if you're trying to raise the humidity in the air, the mist that you mist onto the leaves just doesn't stay there. It's there for maybe 10 seconds. Think about it. If you spray water on yourself, on your face, maybe you've got a lovely Evian spray. I used to have that when I was like 16. I thought it was very bougie. Now it's just a waste of money. But Evian spray, put it on your face, you spray, and even when it's really, really hot, that spray goes, it evaporates into the air, right? And it doesn't last very, very long. But if I put you into a humid zone, let's say you're going on holiday, you're going to Abu Dhabi, or you come to Sydney, Australia, it's very humid. The humidity is in the air. You don't necessarily feel it on your face except for perspiration, but the humidity is there all day long. That's what you want for humidity with your leaves. So spraying your leaves just leaves water on the leaves for a couple of seconds, maybe a couple of minutes, and doesn't help. And the worst part is, if you spray your leaves and you've got stagnant air and you've got no airflow, then that builds mold or fungus or white powdery mildew. So it can create damage to your leaves more than good. So just don't mist. If you want to increase the humidity, increase it. Honestly, the best way is buying a humidifier. You can buy cheap ones, you can buy expensive ones. They create more humidity in the air. If you want to spend a little bit more money, you can also buy humidifiers that read the humidity in the air and switch on and off accordingly. So that's also a very cool kind of humidifier way to start, but it's up to you. But humidifiers are the best. I'm not going to suggest a pebble tray because I've been told by a viewer recently that that doesn't work. So maybe I should do an experiment around that. That's actually probably a very good idea for a video. The other thing that does work though is grouping your plants together, like behind me. That actually does work because leaves do evaporate into the air and it does create a bit of a humidity zone. But the best thing is humidifiers. Right, second myth is actually a piece of advice I got when I very first started buying plants. I didn't get into plants just then, but I had some plants at my house and I just couldn't keep them alive. Like this was when I was back first learning about plants. I did definitely have a black thumb 6 or 7 years ago, and somebody told me to water every Sunday because you'll remember and your plants will need it, and it's just a weekly consistent thing. Now, if that works for you, that's fine. Don't change that. Your environment, your plants, your house, your situation is completely different to every single other person in this world. So if something works for you, don't change it. But think of it this way. Plants are kind of like people. Some are more thirsty than others. Some need more water than others. I don't know about you, but it's very hard for me to drink more than a litre and a half a day. And I know other people who carry their water bottle around with 5 litres in it and drink like 5,000 tonnes a day. If you are like that, I am so jealous of you. I find that really hard. Anyway, back to plants. If you're watering all of your plants at the same time consistently on a weekly basis, then some plants will get what they need and other plants might get too much and other plants might get too little. Instead, check the soil before you need to water it. Now, you can still go around like I do every Saturday and check if your plants need water. That's the consistency you want to take instead, but you just don't consistently pour water in every plant in that go. So check your soil if it needs the watering. If it does, water. You can check by a moisture meter. They are the best thing, especially if you're more into getting into plants, you're just beginning. Some might think it's not cool, but it's a lifesaver, honestly, when you're first starting. The way I check actually is to lift my pot up because I like to dry most of my plants out between waterings. If I have a plant that I don't want to dry out between waterings, or maybe halfway, I will try and use a self-watering pot, or I'll definitely use a moisture meter to try and judge how far down. Other people say you can use your finger to pop into the soil, but the problem with that is, what if you've got a pot this big? Your finger isn't like 5 million millimeters long, is it? So if you pop your finger into the soil, you're only touching the top part of the soil. You want more than just the top inch of your soil to dry in that big pot. You want it to go down at least 2/3, 3/4. You can use like a chopstick chopstick, as long as the chopstick is long enough to fit down to the bottom of your pot, you're trying to check if there's still water in the bottom of that soil mixture, not the top, because the top will dry out first. Have you ever been given bad watering advice and ruined a plant or overwatered a plant because of it? I definitely have, right at the beginning. Oh, and speaking of watering, I did mention it as well. Watering with ice cubes. I honestly, I don't quite get it, right? The advice that I have heard about watering with ice cubes is for orchids. Have you heard that before? To put ice cubes on the top of the root ball of orchids so the water slowly melts into the root balls. I really don't understand why they say that, because orchids are tropical plants and they've come from an ice cold, snowy, icy thing. So when in nature has an orchid got ice on its roots? Now there might be some logical sense to it for water dripping onto it slowly so it gets a little bit of water. Plants don't need a little tiny dripping of water. They need a good drenching when they're watering. When it rains outside, it's a good drenching, and then it dries up and the plant dries out and the root ball dries out. So yeah, just ice cubes. It's probably the weirdest piece of advice I have ever heard. There's probably some weirder though. Let me know if you've heard anything weirder. Let me know the worst piece of advice you've ever been given, and when did you figure out what happened with the advice that you got? When did you figure out that it wasn't good advice and you changed your ways? Let us know in the comments below. I really want to hear stories like that, and I'm sure the rest of the community would too. Myth number 3, more fertilizer equals more growth. I think this is quite logical. It makes you think that if something's not growing, if it's wilting, if it's not healthy, you just want to give it more food or more fertilizer. Technically though, that's actually not true, because if you give it too much fertilizer, it can cause fertilizer burn. So what we'll see is perhaps some blackening or darkening of the leaves, and you won't really know why, because it does take a little while for that fertilizer burn to come in. Look, I'll be honest, it's very, very rare, and one of the things I absolutely recommend to do to negate that is dilute your fertilizer when you're using it. Now, I use fertilizer quite often in my summer months, but I would dilute my fertilizer down to 75% of the recommended dosage from the instructions. So if it tells you 5 mils per litre, then I'll probably go down to 3. If it tells you 3 mils per litre, I'll probably go down to 1. It's kind of like the New Year's resolution around being more healthy. Too much food is just not good for any plant or person. Now, if you haven't fertilized for 6 months, then when you give it fertilizer, it will definitely grow for you. That might be missing out on growth because you haven't given it any fertilizer. And in fact, I've got a whole different video about 10 different ways on how to help your plants grow faster. And again, I'll leave that video up here for you if you want to go have a look. And the other thing I will say is there are some myths about you have to fertilize every week when you're in summer, and you shouldn't fertilize at all in winter. If my plant is growing, I will still give it diluted fertilizer every couple of weeks in winter as well. It needs sunlight for food, and it needs nutrient for strength as well. So I'll still keep fertilizing, which a lot of people say not to, don't do it in winter. So you just got to get used to your plants. It's something you kind of need to learn through plant care, but start off with diluted every couple of weeks in the growth season, not the hot seasons, the growth season. If your plant is growing, if you can see new leaves sprouting or new roots really trying to spread their wings, then I would give it a little bit more fertilizer, even in the colder months. It's growing. Right, so I've gone through 3 very popular myth type suggestions when it comes to plant care. Have you heard these before? Did you start out like that? Are you still doing perhaps one of these? Let me know in the comments below. What's the biggest plant myth that you have been told right at the beginning that you've perhaps changed, especially if you're more intermediate with growth? Leave the myths in the comments below. I know there's more than there's the ones that I'm going to go through today, and let me know if there are any major plant myths that we need to bust to help people do better and grow better with their plant care. Sometimes you think you're doing your best, and you absolutely are doing your best, and it's just because you've got the wrong advice, and that's why it's not working. It's not you, it's the advice. So leave it behind in 2024. Okay, myth number 4, and this is probably coming from social media, because when you look at a social media account by an amazing plant YouTuber, they are repotting consistently, and it feels like you need to repot every year, and that's the myth. Repot your plants every year. Get rid of that old soil, put in new soil. And the truth is, you don't need to. If your plant is still growing healthily, if it's still got room to grow in the pot, don't pot it. You don't need to repot it every year. The ways to check if you do need to repot your plant is if the roots are growing out the base, and I mean like proper growing. If it's sticking out a little bit, maybe a little tiny bit, I wouldn't worry about repotting just yet. But if, like my Monstera right now, I've got roots that are coming down the bottom, they've run out of room, and they're coming back up the top again. That's telling me that it needs a repot. Maybe your plant has just slowed down in growth and it's not growing at all. That's probably because there's not enough soil or any room in the pot before, but check if there's a lot of roots in that pot. You can lift your plant out and see how many roots they are. The average rule of thumb is you want about half of the pot to be roots and half of the pot to be soil. When it gets to about 80-90% roots, that's when you pretty much need to start. The other one, of course, though, is hydrophobic soil. If your soil is hydrophobic, if you're finding that maybe there's this gap in between the pot and your soil, that means your soil soil isn't taking in water, it's shrunk and it's leaving that death gap. Some people call it that death cap. That's what I read the other day. I love that saying. So don't have the death cap. If your soil is hydrophobic and it's not taking in water, when you water it, you'll notice that the water just runs off on the side. It doesn't actually just sit on the top and slowly sink in like it should. That is hydrophobic soil, and then you probably do want to actually repot. The only thing I would say is if it's repotting too often, if it's every 6 to 12 months, you might be stressing out the plant. If it's every 2 to 3 years, that's probably pretty perfect. Right, myth number 5, and I'm including this one because I believed it when I first started with plants as well, and that is plants need direct light. Plants need to go into sunlight. So when I first started my plant journey, I bought 3 plants. I bought an orchid, I bought a dracaena, and I bought a cyclamen, I think it was. And boy, if you know those 3 plants, they are end of the spectrum on the lights, on the type of light they need. Different plants need different type of lighting. So the best thing you can do is Google or get onto a YouTuber or something and see if you can learn about the plant that you've bought or that you've been given as a present. All plants need different lighting. Most of the time though, they need bright, indirect light. And when people say indirect, they mean indirect sun rays, indirect from the sun rays. So it can get sunlight indirectly. So you want to, if your sun rays are coming in this angle from the window, here's the window, and your plant is getting, and your sun rays are getting here, then put your plant here, right? So it's near light, it's bright, it's as close as it can get without going and sitting in direct sun. Does that make sense? So here's the sunlight, here's the pot plant, don't put it here, put it here. I hope that makes sense. Plants don't necessarily need bright direct sunlight, but a bright indirect light, a bright spot in your house, a bright grow light that doesn't burn, they work wonders. And speaking of light, the 6th and final myth I'm going to talk to you about today to leave behind this year as we head into a new year is that there are plants that can survive and thrive in no light conditions. And that is actually a myth. You'll see this across social medias. 10 plants for 0 light bathrooms. I hate, oh my gosh, it gets frustrating when people tell you this because it does not exist. What does exist is plants that better tolerate a lower light condition. But all plants, please, 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 all plants in the world need some kind of light to grow. They need to create photosynthesis in their leaves, and that happens from light. A grow light, indirect sunlight, direct sunlight for cacti and succulents, things like that, but they need light to grow. So please do not believe anyone telling you that you're going to put a plant into a room without any natural light and without a grow light. It's not going to do well. So just please, please, please don't believe someone telling you that there is a plant that can handle no light. So if you're dealing with a space that doesn't get a lot of light, then don't worry. I'm going to show you this video here where I introduce you to the top 8 best low light plants that will help tolerate and grow in lower light conditions. They won't thrive, I'll explain it all in the video, but there are some plants that do better in low light conditions than others. So watch this one next and we'll help you get 2025 to be the year of growing your house into a lush green jungle. Thank you very much for joining me. Have an amazing week full of leaves, love and laughter and maybe a bit of champagne, and I will see you in the new year. Take care. See you later. Bye.